on the frost-laced world of Varelles, where twin moons cast silver halos over endless fields of crystalline snow, and the wind howled through jagged ice spires like a chorus of ancient spirits, the village of Thalcor clung to life in the shadow of the shimmering peaks. It was a place of quiet resilience, where the Varelians, tall, humanoid beings with luminous white skin and hair the color of molten copper, lived in harmony with the planet's harsh rhythms. Among them was Rissa, a huntress of unmatched grace and ferocity, her eyes the deep amber of a dying star, her movements fluid as the auroras that danced above the tundra. She was also a mother, fiercely so, to twin cubs named Lyra and Coven, whose tiny claws had barely learned to grip the frost-rimed bark of the sky trees before they vanished without a trace. The disappearance struck the village like a blizzard in midsummer. One moment, the cubs were playing near the thermal springs, their laughter echoing off the ice cliffs. The next, only their tiny footprints remained, leading toward the Whispering Hollow, a stretch of frozen marshland long avoided for its treacherous sinkholes and the eerie, low-frequency hum that seemed to seep from the ground itself. Panic rippled through Thalcor. Search parties fanned out with plasma lanterns and sonic lures, calling the cubs' names into the biting wind. Rissa tore through the snow on foot, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, her claws unsheathed not in anger but in raw, animal desperation. She cursed the stars, the moons, the gods of frost and flame, anyone who might be listening. 3 days passed. Hope dwindled like the last embers of a dying fire. Then, on the 4th morning, as the smaller moon dipped below the horizon and the larger one blazed crimson in the dawn sky, a scout named Joran returned, breathless and wide-eyed. He spoke not of bones or blood, but of something stranger. A human, alone and half-frozen, lying in a shallow cave near the edge of the hollow, and curled against his chest, wrapped in his tattered thermal blanket, were Lyra and Coven, alive, warm, and sleeping as peacefully as if they'd never left their mother's den. The human's name was Torin Vale. He wasn't supposed to be on Varelles at all. His survey vessel, the Aurora Skimmer, had malfunctioned during a routine atmospheric scan and crash-landed deep in the uncharted northern wastes. With no comms, a fractured rib, and temperatures plunging to lethal lows, Torin had been stumbling south for days, surviving on ration bars and sheer stubbornness, when he heard the whimpering. First, he thought it was the wind. But then he saw them, 2 small, shivering forms huddled in a collapsed ice burrow, their red hair matted with frost, their tiny bodies trembling with the first stages of hypothermia. Without hesitation, Torin shed his outer layers, wrapped them in his body heat, and sang, off-key and hoarse, the lullaby his own mother used to hum when storms rolled over the plains of Novaterra. He didn't know they were alien. He didn't care. They were children. And children, in any species, deserve to live. When the villagers found him, Torin was barely conscious, his lips blue, his skin pale as parchment. But his arms were still locked protectively around the cubs, his body curved around theirs like a living shield. Rissa arrived last, her breath ragged, her eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of disbelief and dawning fury. She expected a kidnapper, a predator, perhaps a rival clan's agent. Instead, she found a stranger, soft-skinned, dark-haired, with eyes the color of storm clouds, who had given his warmth, his strength, perhaps even his life, to save her children. She knelt beside him, her claws retracting as if by instinct. "Why?" she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. Torin blinked slowly, his vision swimming. "They were cold," he managed, his voice cracking. "I wasn't." The village elders debated what to do. Humans were rare on Varelles, and not always welcome. Stories spoke of off-worlders who came with promises and left with plunder. But Rissa silenced them with a single look. "He saved my cubs," she said, her voice ringing with finality. "He stays." Torin was carried into the heart of Thalcor, not as a prisoner, but as a guest, though many watched him with wary eyes. The cubs, once revived with warm broth and gentle hands, refused to leave his side. Lyra, the bolder of the two, would climb onto his lap and trace the strange lines of his human face with curious fingers, giggling when he made silly faces. Coven, quieter and more observant, would curl up beside him during the long nights, his small hand clutching Torin's sleeve as if afraid he might vanish. Torin, in turn, found himself enchanted by their world. The way the ice chimed like glass when struck, how the villagers wove light into their clothing using bioluminescent lichen, the rich, smoky flavor of roasted sky eel stew. And above all, he found himself watching Rissa. She was unlike anyone he'd ever known. Fierce yet tender, proud yet humble. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down ice WRMS and blizzards and lived to tell the tale. Yet when she looked at her cubs or at him, there was a softness in her amber eyes that made his chest ache. He tried not to stare, but sometimes, when she bent over the communal fire to stir a pot of stew, or when she laughed at one of Lyra's clumsy attempts at mimicry, he couldn't help it. And once, when he caught her watching him back, just for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, warm as the thermal springs. But peace on Varelli's was never guaranteed. On the 7th night of Torin's stay, the ground trembled. Not with the usual tectonic groans of the planet's shifting crust, but with something deeper, more deliberate. From the direction of the Whispering Hollow came a low, guttural roar, a sound no natural creature on Varelli's should be able to make. The villagers froze. Children were hurried indoors. Weapons were drawn. Rissa's expression hardened into that of a warrior. "It's back," Joran muttered, gripping his sonic spear. "What is?" Torin asked, rising despite the lingering ache in his ribs. "The Devourer," Rissa said grimly. "An off-world predator. We thought it had moved on after the first attack, but it must have tracked the cub's scent." Torin's blood ran cold. "It took them." "No," she said, her voice tight. "It tried. We fought it off, but it's smarter than we thought. And now it knows where the village is." Before Torin could respond, a second roar split the air, closer this time. Ice cracked in the distance. Torin looked at Lyra and Coven, who clung to each other in the doorway, their eyes wide with fear. He turned to Rissa. "Tell me what to do." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You're wounded." "I'm alive," he countered. "And I'm not letting anything hurt them again." Rissa's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Then you'll need a weapon." She handed him a compact pulse blaster, its grip molded for Varelian hands but adjustable. "Aim for the eyes. It's armored everywhere else." As the villagers formed a defensive line at the village edge, Torin stood shoulder to shoulder with Rissa, the cold biting through his borrowed furs. The wind howled. Snow swirled in frantic spirals. And then, from the mist, it emerged. The Devourer was a nightmare given flesh. A hulking, six-limbed abomination with chitinous plates, glowing violet eyes, and mandibles that dripped with acidic saliva. It moved with terrifying speed, its claws carving furrows in the ice as it charged. The villagers opened fire. Sonic pulses and plasma bolts lit the night, but the beast barely flinched. It swatted aside a warrior with a casual backhand, sending him flying into a snowdrift. Rissa leapt forward, her own claws extended, her battle cry echoing off the peaks. She slashed at its legs, drawing black ichor, but the creature barely noticed. It lunged for her, jaws wide. Torin didn't think, he fired. The pulse blast struck the Devourer's shoulder, staggering it. It turned its burning gaze on him. "Torin, get back!" Rissa shouted. But he stood his ground. Not this time. The beast charged. Torin rolled to the side, firing again. This time he hit an eye. The Devourer shrieked, a sound that made the very air vibrate. Enraged, it swung a massive claw. Torin ducked, but not fast enough. The tip grazed his side, tearing through fabric and skin. He gasped, stumbling back, blood staining the snow. Rissa roared in fury. With a speed that defied her size, she vaulted onto the creature's back, driving her claws into its neck. The Devourer thrashed, trying to dislodge her, but she held on, snarling like the wolf she was named for. Torin, gritting his teeth against the pain, raised the blaster once more. He aimed carefully, waiting for the perfect shot. And then, miraculously, the cubs appeared. "Mama!" Lyra cried, running forward, Coven close behind. "No!" Torin and Rissa shouted in unison. But the cubs didn't stop. Instead, they did something no one expected. They began to howl, not in fear, but in unison, a high, keening sound that resonated through the ice. The ground beneath the Devourer trembled. Cracks spread from its feet. The ice chimed, then shattered. With a final, deafening groan, the earth gave way beneath the beast, swallowing it into a hidden crevasse that had lain dormant for centuries. Silence fell. Rissa dropped to her knees, breathing hard. Torin limped over, his side burning. The cubs ran to their mother, throwing their arms around her. She held them tightly, her body shaking, not from cold, but from relief. Later, as the village tended to the wounded and reinforced the perimeter, Torin sat by the fire, his wound bandaged with antiseptic moss and woven fibers. Rissa approached, carrying a steaming cup of something that smelled like cinnamon and starlight. "You fought like one of us," she said quietly, handing him the cup. "I just did what anyone would," he replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "Not anyone. Only someone with a heart like yours." He looked at her, really looked, at the way the firelight danced in her copper hair, at the strength in her jaw, the tenderness in her eyes when she glanced toward her sleeping cubs nearby. "I don't belong here," he said softly. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But you stayed when you could have run. You gave warmth when you had none to spare. You stood between my children and death." She paused, then added, "That makes you more Varelian than some who were born here." Torrhen smiled, despite the pain. "I think I could get used to that." Days turned into weeks. Torrhen's ship remained unrecoverable, buried under tons of glacial ice. But he didn't mind. He helped rebuild damaged shelters, taught the children Earth games, and learned to hunt sky eels with a spear. He and Rissa spent long evenings talking, about stars, about loss, about the strange, beautiful ways life found to connect across galaxies. The cubs adored him. The villagers, once wary, now greeted him with nods and shared meals. And then came the day the rescue beacon activated. A deep space cruiser from the Terran Alliance had picked up Torrhen's emergency signal. They were en route, ETA 48 hours. The news should have filled him with relief. Instead, a hollow ache settled in his chest. That night, he found Rissa on the ridge overlooking the village, her silhouette framed by the twin moons. She didn't turn as he approached. "They're coming for me," he said. "I know," she replied, her voice steady but quiet. He stood beside her, the cold wind tugging at their clothes. "I don't want to go." She finally looked at him, her amber eyes searching his. "Then don't. It's not that simple. My world, my duties. And ours?" she asked gently. "Are we not your world now?" He had no answer, only the truth, raw and trembling. "I've never felt more at home than I do here. With you." She reached out, her hand brushing his. Her skin was cool, but her touch sent warmth flooding through him. "Then stay," she whispered. "Not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as one of us, as more." He looked down at her hand in his, then at the village below, alive with light and laughter, with the sound of children playing and elders telling stories. He thought of Lyra's giggles, Coven's quiet trust, the way Rissa's eyes softened when she thought no one was looking. The rescue ship would come. But home wasn't a place on a star chart. It was a choice, and Torrhen knew, with a certainty as deep as the ice beneath his feet, what his choice would be. Yet even as hope bloomed between them, the wind shifted. From the direction of the Whispering Hollow, a new sound rose. Not a roar, but a low, mechanical hum. Torrhen's blood ran cold. That wasn't natural. That was technology. Rissa's ears twitched. Her expression darkened. "They've come," she said. "Who?" Torrhen asked, his hand instinctively going to the pulse blaster at his hip. "The ones who brought the Devourer," she said grimly. "Off-world poachers. They've been hunting rare species across the sector. They must have tracked the creature or us." Torrhen's mind raced. If the Terran cruiser arrived while armed poachers were nearby, it could spark a diplomatic incident, or worse, a firefight that would destroy Thalcor. "We have to warn them," he said. Rissa nodded. "But we can't let the poachers reach the village first." Together, they turned toward the sound, their steps quickening. The cubs were safe inside, under the watchful eyes of the elders. Now it was their turn to protect the fragile peace they'd built. As they moved through the snow, side by side, Torrhen felt no fear, only resolve. He wasn't just a stranded human anymore. He was part of something greater. Family, a home, a future worth fighting for. And this time he wouldn't face the storm alone. The mechanical hum grew louder as Torrhen and Rissa crested the ridge overlooking the Whispering Hollow. Below, half buried in snowdrifts and veiled by swirling mist, sat a sleek, obsidian-colored skiff. Angular, silent, and utterly alien to Varelian design. Its hull shimmered with adaptive camouflage, flickering between shades of ice and shadow. Two figures in armored envirosuits moved near the rear ramp, scanning the terrain with handheld biotrackers. Their movements were efficient, cold, mercenary. "They're not here for the Devourer anymore," Torrhen murmured, crouching behind a frost-veined boulder. "They're here for the cubs." Rissa's claws flexed. The twins carry the rarest bloodline in Thalcor, descendants of the first Howlers. Their genetic signature is unmistakable to off-world scanners. Poachers pay fortunes for live specimens. Torin's stomach twisted. He'd heard rumors of black market collectors who kept sentient beings in cryovivariums like exotic pets. The thought of Lyra and Coven in cages made his hands shake. Not with fear, but fury. "We can't let them get close to the village," he said. Rissa nodded, her amber eyes sharp with strategy. "Their ship's shield generator is mounted on the port side. If we disable it, their comms and weapons go dark. But we'll need to get within 10 meters. 10 meters through open snow with thermal sensors?" Torin raised an eyebrow. "That's suicide." A faint, dangerous smile touched Rissa's lips. "Not if we use the hollow song," she explained quickly. The ground in the Whispering Hollow wasn't just unstable, it resonated with subsonic frequencies from deep geothermal vents. The Varelians had long learned to mimic those frequencies with their howls, triggering localized tremors or ice collapses. But it required precise timing, and two voices in perfect harmony. "I can't howl like you," Torin said. "You don't need to," she replied, pulling a small, crystalline flute from her belt. A resonance tuner, carved from sky tree bone. "Blow into this when I signal. The pitch will sync with my call. Together we'll wake the ice." Torin took the flute, its surface cool and smooth. "If this goes wrong." "It won't," she cut in, her gaze locking with his. "Because you trust me, and I trust you." He swallowed hard, then nodded. They moved like shadows through the drifts, using the wind and terrain for cover. Every step crunched underfoot, every breath fogged in the air. But the poachers were focused on their scanners, not the land itself. Arrogance, Torin realized. They thought this world was dead. They didn't understand that Vareli's was alive, watching, waiting. At 50 meters, Rissa signaled. Torin pressed the flute to his lips. She raised her head, eyes closed, and let out a low, mournful note that seemed to vibrate in Torin's bones. He followed, blowing gently. The flute emitted a pure, high tone that wove around her voice like silver thread. The ground trembled. Not violently, just enough to make the poachers pause, glancing around. One tapped his helmet, frowning at a flickering readout. Rissa howled again, louder this time. Torin matched her, his human breath surprisingly steady. The ice beneath the skiff groaned. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. "Now!" she hissed. They sprinted the last 20 meters, dodging falling shards of ice. One poacher spotted them and raised his rifle, but Rissa was faster. She leapt, claws flashing, and disarmed him with a brutal twist. Torin dove for the shield generator, slamming the butt of his pulse blaster into its housing. Sparks erupted. The skiff's lights dimmed. A warning klaxon blared inside the cockpit. The second poacher activated a wrist-mounted plasma caster. Torin rolled aside as molten bolts seared the snow where he'd stood. Rissa lunged, but the man fired a sonic pulse that sent her crashing into a snowbank. Dazed. "Rissa!" Torin shouted. She groaned, trying to rise, but the poacher aimed again. Thinking fast, Torin grabbed the resonance flute and blew a single piercing note, the highest pitch it could produce. The ice beneath the poacher's feet shattered instantly. He screamed as he plunged into the crevasse, his weapon tumbling after him. Silence returned, broken only by the wind and Rissa's ragged breathing. Torin helped her up. Her lip was split, one eye already swelling, but she managed a grim smile. "You're learning," she said. "Had a good teacher," he replied, brushing snow from her hair. They disabled the skiff's core systems and dragged the unconscious poacher into the open, leaving him trussed with thermal rope for the village guard to collect. As they turned back toward Thalcor, the sky began to glow, not with dawn, but with the approach of the Terran cruiser. Its massive silhouette blotted out the stars, engines humming with restrained power. "They'll want to debrief me," Torin said quietly. "Maybe even order me back." Rissa stopped walking. "And what will you tell them?" He looked at her, at the snow dusting her copper hair, at the quiet strength in her stance, at the life they'd begun to build together. "I'll tell them the truth," he said, "that I found something worth more than duty, worth more than Earth." She reached for his hand. "Stay." "I will," he said, "but not just as a guest, not just as a protector." He took a breath. "If you'll have me, as your mate." Her eyes widened. Among the Varelians, the bond of mating was sacred, deeper than marriage, woven into the soul song of the planet itself. It required consent, ceremony, and a shared howl beneath the twin moons. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she lifted her chin and let out a soft, melodic howl, the call of acceptance. It echoed across the tundra, answered by distant voices from the village. The elders were listening. The stars were listening. Torin didn't know the words, but he knew the feeling. He placed a hand over his heart, then over hers. "I choose you," he said simply. She smiled, tears glistening like frost on her cheeks. "And I choose you, Torin Vale, human, hero, and now heart of Thalcor." But their moment was cut short by a new sound, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat. The ice around them began to glow faintly blue. "What is that?" Torin asked, alarmed. Rissa's expression shifted from joy to awe. "The planet, it's responding." From the center of the village, the ancient howling stone, a monolith of black ice said to house the spirit of Varelles, began to emit a low, resonant tone. The cubs, sensing the shift, ran out to meet them, their eyes wide with wonder. "The stone only sings when a true bond is formed between species," Rissa whispered. "It hasn't sung in 3 generations." Lyra tugged Torin's sleeve. "You're ours now," she declared with childish certainty. Coven nodded solemnly. "Forever." As the Terran cruiser descended, its landing struts extending with a hiss of steam, Torin knew his old life was ending. But something far greater was beginning. He stood with Rissa and the cubs as the ship touched down, its ramp lowering to reveal 2 Alliance officers in crisp uniforms. One stepped forward. "Torin Vale? We've come to bring you home." Torin looked at Rissa, then at the village behind her. Alive with light, with song, with love. He stepped forward, but not toward the ship. "I'm already home," he said firmly. "And I'm not leaving." The officer frowned. "Regulations require." "Then change the regulations," Torin interrupted. "Because I'm staying. And if you try to take me by force, you'll have an entire village, and a very protective mother, standing in your way." Rissa stepped beside him, her posture regal, her voice ringing with authority. "Thalcor offers sanctuary to those who protect the innocent. Torin Vale has earned that right tenfold. We ask only that you respect our sovereignty." The officers exchanged glances. Then, to everyone's surprise, the lead officer removed his helmet. He was older, with kind eyes and a scar across his brow. "I served on Xylos Prime during the refugee crisis," he said quietly. "I've seen what happens when we force people to choose between duty and love." He offered a small salute. "Consider your request noted, Mr. Vale. I'll file a full report. Recommend permanent cultural liaison status." Torin blinked. "You'd do that?" The officer smiled faintly. "Sometimes the best assignments aren't on star charts. They're in the hearts of those who found where they belong." As the cruiser lifted off, its engines fading into the starry sky, the villagers gathered around Torin, Rissa, and the cubs. The howling stone continued its song, weaving through the air like a promise. Elders brought woven cloaks of bioluminescent fiber, symbols of kinship. Children danced in the snow, their laughter mingling with the wind. Later that night, beneath the twin moons, Torin and Rissa stood before the stone. The entire village watched in silence as they clasped hands and let out their bond howl. One human voice, one Varelian, rising together in harmony that shook the ice and stirred the stars. And deep in the heart of Varelles, the planet itself seemed to sigh in approval. But peace, even hard-won peace, is never absolute. As the celebration wound down and the fires burned low, Joran approached, his face grim. He held a small, scorched data chip, the kind used by off-world mercenaries. "We found this on the poacher," he said. "It's encrypted, but our tech shaman cracked part of it." He handed it to Rissa. She inserted it into a reader woven from living crystal. Holographic text flickered to life. Coordinates, payment logs, and a name. The Syndicate of Silent Harvest. Torin's blood ran cold. He'd heard whispers of them. A shadow network that trafficked in rare life forms, extinct species, even sentient hybrids. They didn't just hunt. They curated extinction. And according to the logs, Thalcor wasn't their only target. Dozens of worlds were marked. And the twins. They were listed as Priority Alpha. Rissa's grip tightened on the reader. "They'll send more." Torin looked toward the horizon, where the first hints of aurora began to ripple across the sky. "Then we'll be ready." He turned to Rissa, his voice low but firm. "I didn't just find a home here. I found a purpose. If they think they can take your children, your people, your world, they'll have to go through me." She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Then we fight," she said. "Not just for Thalcor, but for every world they've silenced." And as the auroras blazed above them, painting the snow in hues of emerald and violet, Torin knew this was only the beginning. The rescue ship had come and gone. The poachers had been thwarted. But a greater battle loomed, one that would test not just their strength, but the very bond they'd forged beneath alien stars. Yet for the first time in his life, Torin didn't face the unknown alone. He had a family, people, a love as fierce and enduring as the ice itself. The years that followed were not without shadow, but they were woven through with light, bright, enduring, and warm as the thermal springs at the heart of Thalcor. Torin never returned to Earth, nor did he regret it. Instead, he became something new. A bridge between worlds, a guardian of peace, and above all, a husband and father in the truest sense. The bond howl beneath the twin moons was more than ceremony. It was a vow written into the soul of Varellis itself. From that night on, Torin was no longer an outsider. The village elders granted him the title of Corval, Heart of the Pack, a rare honor for any non-Varelian, let alone a human. He learned their songs, their stories, the subtle language of ice and wind. In return, he taught them earth tales, of oceans that stretched beyond sight, of forests that breathed in summer rain, of constellations unknown to Varelian skies. The children adored him, not just for his stories, but for the way he listened, truly listened, as if every word mattered. Rissa stood beside him through it all, her strength his anchor, her laughter his compass. Their love deepened not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments. Sharing stew by the fire after a long hunt, braiding frost lilies into each other's hair during the blue moon, holding each other as the auroras painted their bedroom walls in living color. They argued sometimes, about child-rearing, about village law, about whether sky eel stew needed more spice. But they always made up beneath the stars, foreheads touching, hearts sinking like twin drums. Lyra and Coven grew tall and strong, their red hair catching the light like fire against snow. Lyra inherited her mother's boldness and her father's curiosity, often sneaking off to tinker with salvage tech from Torin's old ship, dreaming of building a vessel that could fly without breaking the sky. Coven, thoughtful and observant like Torin, became a lorekeeper, memorizing the ancient howls and mapping the shifting ice paths with uncanny precision. Both called Torin Papa without hesitation, and he loved them as if he'd held them the moment they took their first breaths. The Syndicate of Silent Harvest did send more hunters, twice. The first time, a cloaked drone skimmed the upper atmosphere, scanning for genetic signatures. But Thalcor was ready. Using Torin's knowledge of human tech and Rissa's understanding of Varelian resonance fields, they built a cloaking lattice from skytree fibers and geothermal crystals that masked the village's biosignature completely. The drone passed overhead, blind and empty. The second time, mercenaries landed in armored drop pods near the shimmering peaks. But they hadn't counted on the unity of Thalcor, or the alliance Torin had quietly forged with neighboring villages. Within hours, the invaders were surrounded, not by warriors alone, but by a chorus of howls so powerful it triggered a controlled ice slide that buried their weapons and left them stranded, humbled, and easily captured. The alliance, now aware of the Syndicate's reach, dispatched a peacekeeping frigate that took the prisoners into custody, and declared Varellis a protected world under interstellar sanctuary law. Peace, once fragile, became permanent. Torin and Rissa married again, this time in a human-style ceremony beneath a canopy of woven aurora moss, with earth wildflowers, grown in a heated greenhouse from seeds Torin had kept in his pocket for years, tucked into Rissa's hair. The villagers wore hybrid garments, Varelian silks stitched with Terran embroidery, and the feast lasted 3 days. Even the howling stone seemed to hum with joy. They built a home on the ridge overlooking the village, part ice dome, part timber frame, with wide windows to watch the stars. In time, 2 more cubs joined their family. Mira, with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's fiery curls, and Joran, quiet and clever, who could mimic any bird call on the planet by age 3. Torin never stopped missing Earth's sun on his skin or the sound of rain on leaves, but he found new joys. The crunch of snow underfoot at dawn, the taste of moonberry nectar, the way Rissa's hand felt in his after a lifetime of shared winters. And when the twin moons aligned in the sky, casting the world in silver, they would stand on their porch, arms around each other, watching their children play in the snow, their laughter rising like music into the endless night. Years turned to decades. Torin's hair grayed, his steps slowed, but his eyes never lost their spark. Rissa's amber gaze remained sharp, though her howls grew softer with age. They aged together, not as human and alien, but as two souls who had chosen each other across the void, and built a life brighter than any star. When Torin finally passed, peacefully in his sleep, with Rissa's hand in his and the auroras dancing above, the entire planet seemed to hold its breath. The howling stone fell silent for the first time in centuries. But as the villagers gathered to sing him home, Lyra stepped forward, placed her hand on the stone, and began to howl, not in grief, but in gratitude. One by one, the others joined, their voices rising in a harmony that shook the ice and lit the sky. Rissa lived many more years, a matriarch beloved by all. She told her grandchildren stories of the human who fell from the stars and gave his heart to the snow. And when she too returned to the ice, her final words were whispered to the wind. Find him again, in the next life, and the next, and the next. Their legacy endured. Falkor became a beacon, a place where humans and Varelians traded not just goods, but dreams. A cultural exchange program flourished. Children from Earth came to learn the ways of the ice. Varelian scholars visited Terran universities to study poetry and quantum botany. And at the center of it all stood the Veilthal home, now a museum and sanctuary, where visitors could sit by the fire and hear the story of the man who saved 2 cubs and found a universe in return. They had faced monsters, mercenaries, and the vast loneliness of space. But in the end, love had been the strongest force of all. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, like the pulse of a planet, like the warmth of a shared blanket on a frozen night. And so, beneath alien stars and familiar moons, Torin and Rissa's story did not end in tragedy or separation, but in the quiet, radiant truth of a happy life, lived fully, loved deeply, and remembered forever. Years flowed like meltwater through the ice valleys, and Torin and Rissa's love only deepened with time. Their home on the ridge became a haven of laughter, warmth, and shared stories beneath the twin moons. Lyra and Coven grew into wise and courageous adults, honoring both their Varelian roots and their human father's legacy. Mira and Jorn followed, filling the house with new songs and curious questions about stars and snow. Torin never regretted staying. Every sunrise over the shimmering peaks felt like a gift. Rissa often teased him for his terrible howling, but she always joined in, their voices blending like wind and flame. Together, they watched their children marry, their grandchildren take first steps in the snow, and their village thrive in peace. The syndicate never returned, warded off by unity, courage, and the quiet strength of a world that refused to be broken. When age silvered Torin's hair and softened Rissa's steps, they still walked hand in hand through the Whispering Hollow, now blooming with frost lilies each spring. They sat by the thermal springs, remembering the day fate brought them together. On clear nights, they pointed out Earth's distant star to wide-eyed grandchildren, whispering tales of courage, kindness, and unexpected love. They grew old not with sorrow, but with full hearts and quiet joy. And when their time came, they left behind not just memories, but a legacy. A village where human and Varelian lived as one, bound by respect, family, and the enduring power of choosing each other, again and again. Their story became legend, told in howls and lullabies, echoing across Varelis for generations. And in every aurora that danced above Falkor, the people saw their love, eternal, radiant, and finally happily whole.